Hey there, Otaku, Ken-chan here with another episode of Go Omega Otaku Gamer Alpha, and today we're going to talk about... Yes! The Atari 5200. Now, the Atari 5200 was actually a second generation console, the same as the 2600. It was still in that generation. Seems it took them a while to get that generation up to snuff, make it something worthwhile. It was made available first in November of 1982 in the United States and Canada, and it was discontinued in 1984, just 2 years later. Didn't do too well. The CPU was a MOS 6502C at 1.79 megahertz. It used a joystick or a trackball. And its predecessor was the Atari 2600, its successor was the Atari 7800. It was more commonly known as the Atari 5200, but it was also referred to as the Atari 5200 Super System. Now this is the controller for the Atari 5200. We're going to look at this first, and you have your start button here. You have a pause button here, which I'll just say at that time there weren't really much in the way of video game systems that had a pause button on the controller. That's something that we kind of take for granted today, that that's just like that. But there was a time in video gaming history where you couldn't pause your game from your console or from your controller, and as a matter of fact there was a time where you couldn't pause your game at all. There's a reset button here, buttons here, fire button, action button, whatever, if you're left-handed or right-handed, and then you have like this phone thing, and they have these overlays for these. Now here's what I mean by the overlays. This is Super Breakout here, and you turn it over, and there's this overlay thing on the back here of the cart that pops out. You can then take this and slide this into your into your controller, and you have your extra games button here, your 1 to 4 players button here, and your game select here. And it just made the controller more versatile. It made you have a little bit more control over what was going on. Okay, not a bad little setup. I mean, at the time it was probably the most logical thing that Atari really could have done with this. You had like the Odyssey 2 system that had a keyboard built into the console itself, like a full membrane, QWERTY keyboard. But rather than do something like that, they just put their little keyboard thing for extra control right on the controller itself. And of course, going back to the controller, of course, you have the joystick in the middle here. This one snaps back to the middle pretty well, fairly well. One of the things that happens to these over time is the snapping back tends to go away. It tends to lose its its spring, so you pull down on it and it stays there, and it flops to one side and it stays like that. This one's in pretty darn good shape, actually, that it returns to center quickly. Overall, not a bad design, really, in my opinion. Now this is the unit itself. Okay, and you'll see that it's very large. It's ridiculously large. I fail to see why they had to make it this big. It doesn't make any sense. If you go to for example, here's this. This is like a door on the back that opens, and this is just a big empty space. And I'm trying to figure out what that might be for. Let's say you take a cartridge or something and you put that down in there. You can't close the door on that, so I don't know if it's for storing that, or maybe the controller's supposed to go in there. That doesn't really work either, so I'm not exactly sure what the door is for, or what you're supposed to put into that. There's 2 nubs in there. I don't know, maybe there was some attachment that they were going to make for it that sat here and plugged into this, or you never know. Oftentimes console manufacturers manufacture things like this, or ports or things, for things that never actually get made later on. You have your power button here, and it's sleek. It's sleek, and it looks pretty cool. It looks like the rest of the family of the Atari systems at this time. You know, you had the redesigned 2600, looks like it. See how they're similar? And then the 7800 that came after it, still the same kind of angled up design. Cartridge port, you know, in the middle, silver strip through the center of the thing. If you see the similarities there. But of course, this was the design that started this look. The 2600, as you know, did not look like this originally. This came out after this, probably about the same time as this. But anyhow, there's two controller ports, one here, one here. There's no controller in that. You can put a trackball in there, or you know, or you can have two controllers. I think maybe you might even be able to do two trackballs. I'm not sure about that. I think maybe the trackball might require both of these. I'm not exactly sure of that, but that's what it looks like there. The system, of course, is not backwards compatible with the 2600, like the 7800 was. The 7800 was backwards compatible with this. For some reason, they interrupted that for the 5200. As you can see here, if I put the games out here, that's a 2600 cartridge. This is a 5200 cartridge. Okay, you can see the difference in the size. Okay, this is, as you see, much larger than a 2600 cartridge. And of course, they didn't label the ends like they did during the 2600 days. And of course, the cartridges fit in here like this, and you snapped it in. And since we're on the games now, let's go ahead and look at some of the games. Now, everybody remembers how bad the Pac-Man game was on the Atari 2600. They kind of redeemed themselves with this. Not the greatest controller in the world, but there you prick. A little bit of Galaxian for you here. Yeah, some Centipede. Ooh, that was abrupt. Ah! You can tell I'm good at this one. Yeah, that's right, it's Moon Patrol. Yeah, I cleared that. What are you talking about? It's pole position. Ah, yeah, right. In your dreams. Seventh. Now, if you saw or noticed on the 5200 on the graphics there, the graphics, of course, are much better than the 2600. They built the thing to compete with the Intellivision, but it ended up going toe-to-toe with the ColecoVision. And I'll tell you this right now, I've had a ColecoVision. Actually, I have. Right now, I don't have a ColecoVision. I have a Dyna 2-in-1, which plays ColecoVision games. Some of these games, you know, go across both platforms. They're on ColecoVision and the 5200. And despite what people got this idea in their heads about, I would have to say that the 5200 probably looks better than the ColecoVision. It just does. The 5200 also used the same basic guts that you would find in their 400 and 800 computer line. And a lot of those games are all, basically the same. For example, that Pac-Man game I was playing looks basically the same as the 400 or 800 computer game. The 400 and 800 computer game, though, starts a lot slower. There are some differences, Not a whole lot of them. But overall, it's the same guts as the 400 or 800. The games look basically the same. Like games like Pole Position, for example, look the same. It's a port. It's not that hard to do. The original 5200 units that they shipped at first had this box that you plug both the machine into to get its power and your TV stuff into somehow to send to the TV, and then all that mess plugged into a wall. Luckily mine doesn't have that nonsense. Mine has a plug that goes into the wall and an RF cable that goes into the television. They redesigned that to get rid of that. That was terribly inefficient and ridiculous. So what they ended up with was basically a system that was a lot like the 2600, except larger and more powerful. By that point, the name Atari had become synonymous with these not so good looking games, which is probably the reason why so many people thought the ColecoVision games looked better than 5200 games. They didn't. Okay, they didn't. And I'll argue that with anyone. They did not look better than the 5200 games. The 5200 games look better than the ColecoVision games. So anyway, it's big, it's bulky, it's clunky, but it looks cool. The games that it plays look better than ColecoVision games. Sorry. And the controller leaves a little to be desired. But for a collectible, it's far more rare than the 2600. It's worth picking up if you can get it cheap and you have space for it. It's the Atari 5200 Super System.